So, part 3. So again, just to recap what we've talked about so far. In the first video we talked about cortisol, elevated cortisol, and its effect on our systems. So for example, cortisol, think about cortisol as an energy releasing hormone. It releases energy into the body in times of stress. Fasting, exercise, all those things that your body will think, okay, I need energy to really cope with this. Cortisol does that. Now, again, it does it by breaking down fat, it does it by breaking down muscle protein to convert back into amino acids. So it can convert both of them into blood glucose. Remember, blood glucose or blood sugars is ultimately where the energy is going to come from. From there, from the blood, it can go into the cells, specifically muscle cells, liver cells, but every cell basically that requires energy, which is all of them. So cortisol under times of stress will break down stored energy to release back into the system as glucose. All right, to try and remember that. The knock-on effect here is because there's blood glucose or blood sugar levels have now been elevated because of this breakdown effect of the cortisol, the pancreas now has to release insulin to help store all that glucose into the cells. Now, because this is chronic, happening all the time, not just an acute response, insulin is constantly elevated, constantly trying to force energy into the cells. So first thing, maybe if the cell's already saturated, it means it's full because it's constantly getting filled up and you're never really used it all, especially if you're not somebody who does resistance training, because remember, resistance training is the best way to use the stored muscle energy, therefore replenishing it constantly because we've used it. So you've got insulin coming out. Insulin is an energy storage hormone. So again, cortisol breaks down energy from muscle tissue or fat to put that back into the bloodstream. Insulin comes in, takes the energy from the bloodstream and stores it back into the muscles and the cells. So you can see exactly what's happening here all the time. Remember, if the muscle cells are full, if the liver cells full, the next place it goes in is stored as body fat. So what's happening here is cortisol, insulin. When insulin is constantly elevated, we end up with insulin resistance, which means the cell, again, we're going to talk specifically muscle cells and liver cells here, they can't hear the signal of insulin because they've just been burnt out by one of two reasons. One, because insulin's pumping so hard and so high that the wee receptor on top of the cell gets burnt out, or because of the LPL, because of the way the body's breaking down subcutaneous fat and storing it as visceral fat, the cells can get covered in a fatty membrane, which means that the insulin can't even hit the receptor site because of this. It's covered in sort of fat. So one of two reasons that causes insulin resistance. Either way, insulin's not getting to the receptor site on the cell. They tell the cell to open up and store in the energy. So the cell becomes very tired and fatigued, although blood sugar levels are high because insulin's trying to store it in cells but won't go in. This means then it has to be stored as fat even more. And again, because of LPL, we're recycling that subcutaneous fat and we're storing it all as visceral fat, which is accumulation of fat around the organs, specifically here the liver. The job of the liver one of the jobs of the liver is to make fat storage. It's a process called novolipogenesis. Novo meaning new, lipo meaning fat, and genesis means creating for something else. Same as the liver will also do gluconeogenesis, which produces glucose from all the things to, again, elevate blood sugars. So whenever the liver, with fatty liver accumulation, it's called a non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome, a non-alcohol fatty liver. Now, this is a very new phenomenon. Before, say, the 1900s, anybody with fatty liver, it was pretty much always due to alcohol. Alcohol accumulates fat in the liver. We'll talk about it in another video. But because insulin levels are so high and because there's so much blood glucose circulating now, you got to remember, why is this new? Because this is the first time in human history that we've had food in abundance, not just in abundance, but overconsumption of food in abundance. So it's not just that we're overeating because we've now food available, we're actually just eating for the sake of fucking eating. So we get insulin pumping through your system 24/7. And again, there's the other problem. So let's say you have this elevated cortisol, which is causing this elevated insulin, which is causing this elevated blood sugar spike all the time, which is causing insulin resistance, and then you're eating carbohydrates, excess carbohydrates. So you're putting excess energy on top of the energy that won't be stored in the cell anyway. So you can see everything's going on this body fat. So even that wee bit of carbohydrate you're eating, because the body cannot actually do anything with it, because it can't do anything with this, the glycogen, the glucose that it's making itself. It definitely can't deal with the glucose and the carbohydrates that you're consuming. Alright, so that's more body fat accumulation. And again, once we talk about fatty liver, right, you got to understand that the role of the liver here is they store some energy and they make some new fats. They make fats for the body that's needed. Gluconeogenesis, neogenesis. All right, the liver then becomes just basically a fat production machine, because insulin's constantly present, telling the liver to store. The liver's trying to store all this energy, fat accumulation around it, and the whole thing just starts to break down. Then what we have then is we get elevated insulin. So the insulin now elevated all the time because the blood sugar levels are constantly elevated, because cortisol levels are elevated. You can see how this goes on. Now, elevated insulin, that's causing a problem called hyperinsulinemia. Hyper meaning high, insulin meaning insulin, anemia meaning blood. Anyway, anemia at the end of it means it's in the blood. All right. So what is hyperinsulinemia? Now, remember, think about this as back in nature. From an evolutionary point of view, we eat some food, specifically carbohydrates, blood sugar levels come up, insulin comes up, stores all that energy, the energy is now stored, insulin goes back down, we go a period of time with no food or energy expenditure, right? Insulin level goes down, basically just goes back down to the baseline. A few hours later, a few days later, we consume more food, insulin comes back up, goes back down. In this scenario, we have insulin elevated all the time. Your body's not used to that. Your body's not designed to handle that. Now, there's other processes that the body will usually get rid of insulin. So insulin spikes up, tells the cell to open up. Insulin then has to be taken out of the body. It only does it with the liver and the kidney, but the liver's not functioning too well because it's full of freaking fat. Right, so now there's extra pressure in the kidneys. Now, what does this elevated insulin do? This will cause things like hardening of the arteries, a whole pile of knock-on health issues that you don't even want to go there. It'll also cause burnout of the pancreas, pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is actually on the rise at the minute. Type 2 diabetes, all the whole cascade of stuff is just not good. Heart disease, all that kind of stuff, because insulin's constantly pumping and the body can't get rid of it. Now, here's my gripe with this, right? Again, I get some people come to me with their blood, to get their bloods done, and they say, well, what does this mean? Now, when you go to the doctors for your blood, they will normally do one called hemoglobin A1C. All right, hemoglobin A1C is basically a 3-month look of where your glucose levels have been. Now, you can look at your hemoglobin A1C and say, look, your blood glucose have been fine over the last 3 months, so therefore you're not going to be insulin resistant or type 2 diabetic. But that's not actually what's happening here. I want you to think about this, right? So imagine this is a cell, right? And we can fill it up with energy, blood glucose, right? And the wee receptor site's there at the top. That opens up, lets all the energy in, cell's full, thank you very much. So insulin comes, hits this wee switch, open up because there's blood sugar levels here, everything sort of sippers in, this fills up energy, insulin goes down, thank you very much. Now imagine, just to make the terms easy, it takes about 2 units of insulin, they come and push that up and let all the energy in. Now there's a couple of different things that can happen. One, imagine this starts to clog up with fat, alright, because there's fat circulating in the system, and this has been hit so many times with insulin that this just doesn't, it's a bit stiff and hard, right? But usually 2 units of insulin will cause this to open up nice, and this will fill up with energy. By the time it fills up with energy, insulin's normally dissipated and go back down. Makes sense. Insulin resistance comes along. Now again, hemoglobin A1C is testing the efficiency of the inside of this to store up and use up. Fine, that number's all well and good, but what does it take? From an insulin point of view, they actually do that. So it used to take 2 units of insulin, boom, energy in, lovely jubbly. Remember, this is now clogged up with fat. This is now hard to push. 2 units of insulin is going, nothing's happening here, nothing's happening. 10 units of insulin, up a wee bit. Now this is not letting anything really in. 20 units of insulin, they force this open to allow energy in for this to fill. Now from a hemoglobin A1C perspective, this is fine. But from an insulin point of view, this is fucked. Alright, that's called insulin resistance. That means insulin's elevated all the time, not just as insulin all the time. The pancreas is going, right, I've released some insulin, this ain't working. I'm going to release more insulin. This ain't working. We're going to release even more insulin. Oh, we get a wee bit open. More insulin. So the pancreas is like overworking just to get this to work the capacity. Now again, the problem is, from a hemoglobin A1C perspective, from cellular glucose intake, it's fine. But what is it taking to get that? Instead of 2 units of insulin, it's now taking 100 units of insulin to do the same job. And so, even though the doctor may look at your hemoglobin A1C, I know I'm saying that over and over and over, it doesn't say what's happening from an insulin point of view. You could be suffering from hyperinsulinemia, heart arteries, heart disease, pancreatic cancer, type 2, borderline type 2 diabetes. Now, even though, and here's working okay, it doesn't give you a bigger picture of what's happening. Does that make sense? So that's part of the issue, accumulated fatty liver, and then never mind if you take some alcohol at the weekends on top of that, boom, everything's breaking down here. All that started with that elevated cortisol. Does that make sense? And this is where some of the problems come in. And then on top of all that, like I said, you're dumping sugar on top of it, all those cream fingers and chocolate cakes and all that kind of stuff, as well as more alcohol to make sure the liver's not actually working and processing the storage system anyway, and the whole system gets clogged up and binds out. You end up taking a heart attack and dying in the age of 50 where you shouldn't have. You should have been living the ripe old age of 90, nice, fit and healthy. Alright? So that's what's happening here inside you. So in the next video, I think that's scary enough. In the next video, we're going to talk about what can we do about it and how do we make sure that everything starts working and goes back to normal. And also what's caused the elevated cortisol. It can be stress, hormonal changes, all those kind of stuff. What are the signs and symptoms early on? What can we focus on? And if you're a certain age, let's say you're a woman in your 30s, you can be massively prepared for menopause, because menopause will trigger all this. Alright? Elevated cortisol. And we haven't even talked about what's happening up here yet, from a food craving point of view, which makes it even worse, because all this is happening. What it's actually causing is more sugar cravings. But you're tired, so you're tired all the time thinking, I've got no energy, I need to eat some food to get energy, but this whole system inside is just not processing it. Does that make sense? There we go.